Boardroom Bound, episode 130, Putting Women in Leadership Positions, The Secret to Success, with Anouk Pappers.
That having a strong online presence generates up to 48% more business opportunities. And it's just part of your personal sales funnel to make sure that your Google presentation or your online presence is as good as it can be. And it's like, you spend, $1,000 or $2,000 on a new suit. You also should spend money on building your online presence.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Anouk Pappers. She is someone who has over 20 years of experience in corporate reputations, interviewed over 800 CEOs, CFOs, and entrepreneurs around the globe to understand what capabilities and qualities leaders have to project. She has seen firsthand as a C-suite advisor how important taking control of your online presence is to sustained success. And this is something I wanted all of us to understand because in order to land in the boardroom, you have to have a position of authority. So not only are you out there reading, writing, sharing, speaking, but you have to make sure people know about that. And Anouk is an expert in that. And she's going to give us some actionable advice that is simple that you can take after today. And you'll never think about Google search results the same way again. I promise. Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about director certification. Want to join your first board, or are you looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach. Now, through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Coaching and Certification course, you get both modern board director candidate packaging and modern board operations knowledge integrated within one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation upon course completion. It's designed for individuals and groups. You can learn more at bit.ly/IBDC-D. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/IBCDC-D. And now let's jump into the show. Anouk Pappers, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, delighted to have you on the show today. And this is one of those situations where you were giving a presentation that I was the consumer of and listening to and thought, this is invaluable content. This is going to be so useful for our audience. You took what for some people is a very complex and confusing situation. And you just distill it down to something really simple and actionable, which I know everybody here will benefit from today. So delighted to have that expertise on the show. But before we get into that solution, which is just so helpful, I would like to give a little bit of context for our audience of how you got to be this person who, well, you don't travel as much during the COVID days, right? But you used to be traveling all around the world, sharing this knowledge. Now you're doing it virtually. But talk us about the background, the information that got you here, and all the research you did in order to figure out this solution we're going to talk about today.
Okay, happy to. Well, actually, as my accent might give away, I'm not from the US. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And ever since I was a little girl, I was fascinated by cultures, by traveling. So I was reading Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days at a very young age. And then I said, when I grow up, I'm going to travel around the world and meet interesting people. So when I was 18, I decided to study anthropology because that would for sure allow me to travel the world. Well, it didn't. So then I said, you know what, I'm going to build my own company. I'm going to build my own project. And I set out in 2002 to travel the world, meet CEOs and CMOs of companies, interview them, and help them tell their story. And because I'm an anthropologist, I look at things a little bit differently, and I call that third-party storytelling. So I look from the outside in, and I try to understand why a company is doing what they're doing, so I try to find out their purpose, but also from the people. So traveling around the world for several years, interviewing all these interesting people up until 2013 when something happened. So one of the CEOs I was interviewing, he said, it's great what you're doing for my brand. However, I need you to do this for me as a CEO. Because we started living in this reputation economy, in this reputation world, where everybody's starting to Google everyone. And he said, my shareholders, journalists, stakeholders, they're all Googling me, and I really don't like what they see. So please, guys, help me build my personal brand. So we did this in 2013 for this one CEO, and fast forward today, it's around 85% of our business, working with CEOs, board members, high-level executives to build their personal brand, articulate it online, and make sure that when people Google them, everything is there and you're being your best, you're positioning your best self, let's say, online.
And we should be really clear, if anybody has not had the fun of Googling themselves and seeing what pops up, we highly encourage that as the first step. Now, there's probably a difference, Anouk, if someone is like a John Doe versus a very specific name in terms of what we might see pop up. But it is really telling. You can see whether you're on there at all or whether you're just wildly off the page. And that's probably very different starting points in terms of how someone goes about this process, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are some of these things. Indeed, if your name is John Smith or Jane Smith, then you're going to have a really, really hard time. But in general, I think it's a good idea to start by Googling yourself and see what comes up. Is it you? Is it relevant? Is it in any way current? Because the thing is, you know that everybody Googles you. And it's funny, whenever we do a presentation, I ask who Googled themselves. And let's say it's around 30% of people Google themselves. Okay. Then the second question is, who Googles others? And then it's around 95%. So the question is, how can you not Google yourself when you know that others are Googling you? So if you think about, I know what you look like online, Alexander, I Googled you, I know exactly what you look like, but you have no clue because you don't Google yourself. And I think about, it's like walking into a meeting, physical meeting, those days when we had those physical meetings, without looking in the mirror. Who does that? Nobody. You know what you look like before you walk into a meeting. And suddenly, because it's online, we have no clue and we just go there and we know that people look for us, and we don't care, or we don't know, or we're in denial. So that's the first important step. And usually I really urge people to Google themselves every 3 months just to have an idea of what other people see. And if you don't like what you see, there's a zillion things that you can do to fix it. And for example, if your name is John Smith, there are many, many, many John Smiths. However, if you have a middle name, you can use that, and that might already make a difference. So let's say your name is John Fitzgerald Smith, and you start using that on your LinkedIn profile, on your email signature, on your business card, everywhere you start using your middle name or a middle initial, or add something to your name. You can add a positioning statement to your name. So there are some tricks, let's say, that you can do to make yourself less of the John Smith, one in a million than there is.
And I just want to be very clear for my audience, in case anybody hasn't figured this out yet, when you are looking to fill a board seat, you aren't trying to get placed onto a board, people are looking for someone specific. They want someone with a position of authority, someone who has the right expertise that they need. And that's why we're having this discussion today. You have probably begun to think, okay, how do I get in the press? How do I get published? How do I get speaking events? You want that information. You've been working so hard on to build that brand authority about yourself to be found, which is part of what we're talking about with Anouk today. And we're going to talk about not only what you do, but how it gets found. And it's fascinating when you think Anouk, my basic line is LinkedIn. That's where I go in a professional context to go look at people, but that's only part of the story. What you're saying is there's so much more out there, whether you know it or aware of it or not.
Yeah, exactly. I always think about it as if I Google you or when I Google you, there are 10 hits on the first page. And LinkedIn is one of them. And LinkedIn is king. LinkedIn is usually one of the top hits. So you have to make sure that your LinkedIn is impeccable. It's up to date. It's showing who you are. Use good images. Add interesting content. But that's only one of the 10 hits. And more people are looking beyond LinkedIn to see who you are. Especially if they're looking for you for a board seat, they're going to do a whole due diligence and they're going to look for images, they're going to look for videos, they're going to look at all the articles that are about you. Then imagine that there are two candidates for the board seat. Probably there are more, but let's say two. One of them has a really great online presence. Thought pieces, articles, white papers, videos, so you can see how this person comes across. The other person, so. Who are they going to invite first for a meeting? The person, of course, with a good online presence. Thinking about that their CVs or their resumes are more or less the same. So the one with the strong online presence wins, let's say, the first interview. If this person during the interview really makes a good impression, they might just disregard the second person altogether. So you're missing out on opportunities that you're not even aware of that they exist.
And we'll explain what this looks like, but I remember one of the big takeaways that sort of hit me in the middle of the eyes during your presentation, Anouk, was the Google search results are 3 types of different results. I'd always remembered, of course, the website, and I'm used to finding the images as well, but there's also the sort of the video feeds that are popping up as well, which is really interesting because you can see what someone sort of looks and feels like, especially when the world is so different now, how that's helpful. So we want to be conscious it's not just your social media handles that are popping up, but it's you in lots of different contexts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think in the past few years, the relevance of video content has really risen. And now in time of COVID even more. But a board wants to see how you come across. They want to know how you speak. They want to see your demeanor. It's not just a static picture or a piece that you've written. They want to know, and the best way of getting to know you without meeting you in person is, of course, when they see you on video. And we actually did a whole series of video resumes for one of our clients who was looking to place people in boards and in the C-suite. And that really gave us a very good first impression of a candidate. And they were very different. So, of course, one person is more comfortable in front of the camera than another person, but still you get an idea of the way they speak, about how they present themselves. So it has become more and more important. Also, when you look at your generic results, so let's say when you Google someone, there is the first tab that you see, which is called all results. There, what's becoming more and more important is what we call title scanning. So, for example, you said I used your social media handles, but your Twitter is just your Twitter, unless you use a really great header to position yourself on your Twitter. Same for your LinkedIn. If you put there that you are an SVP or a VP or a CEO, that's okay, but it's not really interesting. So think about adding a positioning statement there. Say something additional about beyond the jobs that you have. And title scanning, if you are publishing an article on a certain platform, make sure you use interesting titles. But maybe we'll get back to that later as well.
So these are good examples. I think what we've done is you probably whetted the appetite of our audience to go, okay, I get it. I need to do this. I need to be more aware of it. And from the discussion today, clearly we want to be talking about what someone stands for, right? They have to build their personal brand, become a position of authority, someone that people recognize or a subject matter expert on a certain topic. How would you recommend people go about doing that?
Well, what we work with is what we call a personal brand nucleus, which is a methodology that divides your personal brand into 6 different dimensions. And the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is that they talk about what they have done in the past. And if you look at filling a board seat or another next goal that you have to talk about what you bring to the table. And you have to think about that for a large part, everybody who is looking for that specific board seat has the same background or a similar background. So how do you make sure that you stand out? How do you make sure that they pick you for a first interview? That's where your personal brand comes in. That's where you have to think about, what is my unique benefit point? what problem do I solve for a company that I would be on the board of? What's my leadership style? What makes me different? And those are difficult questions, and that's why, of course, why we do them with the people we work with. But it's something to think about, and it makes you realize that there are elements in your personality which are beyond the job that you're doing, which makes why people want to work with you. Why do people hire you? What do people say about you when you're in the room, and maybe even also when you're not in the room? So it's really important to find out those specific elements. What do I want people to know about me before they meet me? What's my positioning statement? And a positioning statement, you can see this as an umbrella statement, which says something about you, 2 or 3 words. And no matter what you're going to be doing, whatever you do fits underneath it. Maybe I give you an example. It's one of our clients is a change catalyst. And she's the CEO of a big network, and she facilitates people who are onboarding to find board seats in healthcare. What she does is she helps you onboard, but she also talks to boards. She does speaking engagement at boards. She facilitates changes, so that's why she's a change catalyst. And whether she's doing this for her network or she's doing this in other organizations that she's part of, everything she does, everything she's motivated by is to bring about change. Again, it's not an easy one, and it usually takes several sessions or some time to think about, but it's really important to see for yourself what makes me different. It can be a collaborative leader. Another board director we work with, we defined that she's a dynamic collaborative leader. And that says more about her than we would just say she's an independent board director. So that's an important part of building your personal brand.
And just to be very clear here, you've hinted about this before. So you're adding a few keywords, not after your title, because you are not your job title. We've sort of hinted at that before, but also we don't want people to hide behind their company or their brand, right? Because they, as an individual, are a brand. That's what you're helping them focus and build out, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, we work with people who have had a very long-standing career in Wall Street or at big consumer companies, and either at some point they retire or they get laid off for whatever reason, and then they're suddenly out on their own. And they're in their 50s or sometimes in their 60s, and they're like, okay, but who am I? Because I was always the person working at company XYZ, and every door opened for me. Now I'm just Jane Smith or John Smith, and nobody opens their doors. So sooner than later, you have to start thinking about and defining who you are, separate from the company you work. And that's the thing that your positioning statement does for you, because it's on a higher level. And in a way, it has nothing to do with what you do. It has much more to do with who you are and what you stand for. So whether you work at company A, B, or you're sitting in board C, you're still that person.
And so you've convinced us all about the need to do the personal branding information. So we're figuring out, what our goals are, which is probably not just land a board seat, but probably within a specific industry and probably a certain subject matter expertise that you bring to it. So you've figured out your target audience who might be speaking, say, the chair of the nominating governance committee in those places. And what you've told us about being your authentic self with your unique value proposition, and that's what you want to get across. Then it's doing that, right? So it's building that platform for yourself where you're creating the content and you're sharing it, because if you don't share it, it never happened, right? Like if you talked at, many of us are not traveling to go to events, but if you're talking at a conference now and nothing gets posted about it, it's like it never happened, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You just stole one of my favorite one-liners.
Sorry. I learned it from you. I'll give you credit for it.
Yeah. It's like what we say. If you don't publish, it didn't happen. And of course, the easiest example is with a presentation or a conference where you go to and you speak. You have your audience of 100 or 200 people, but nothing else. So if you don't record it, ideally on video, but if it's not allowed, take a picture, write a short piece about, I was presenting at this and this conference, and these were my main key takeaways. It's there. It's proof that you are a speaker. It's proof that you are a thought leader on this topic. And again, it's all about creating content, because how do I prove that I am a thought leader? I can say I'm a thought leader, but I have to show it. And it's another funny thing is, don't tell me you're funny, make me laugh. You have to show me that you are the go-to person for this specific topic. And it's also, so once you have defined your personal brand, you have to start thinking about what would be my communication topic. And maybe I can share a short example which really resonates with a lot of people. It's a woman, and she is a wealth management investor in New York, and there are many of those. So she said, I'm looking for new clients. How do I differentiate myself from my neighbor, my next door, from all the other managers? So we started talking about, not about what she does, because again, that's the same that all the others do as well. We started talking about her passion, and we found out that she's all about the environment. So we said, wait a minute, why don't you specialize yourself? Why don't you start speaking more and more about ESG investing, which is the economic, social, governance investing? She said, that's a great idea, because that will help me differentiate myself. And if in a few years' time I would only have clients that are interested in ESG investing and it will still fill my portfolio, I would be happy. So what she did, she started reading more. She started interviewing peers. She started interviewing clients about this topic. So suddenly she became the expert. And the good thing about interviewing someone else is that they will also share it in their networks. So she did it in her network, which is great. But people who already know you and know what you're all about, that's one. The challenge is to get into new networks. Mm-hmm. And a great way of doing that is interviewing others so that they will share their story in their and yours at the same time in their networks.
So, for example, after today's recording, I know you'll be posting about it, because that way we know that it happened and it'll be shared with both of our networks.
Exactly. And I will be in your network and you will be in my network.
And I love the example that you shared. And for our audience, like let's talk about what's relevant to boards. You think about topics like strategy and risk and other ones like that if you are building that, and frankly could be cybersecurity, it doesn't really matter what area your expertise is, but you're doing that, you're sharing that, you're growing it, you're putting it out there. And, I think, Anouk, maybe we should talk about, people might say, literally, what should I do? Where should I put it? Should these be LinkedIn posts? Should they be on my Twitter? Should they be on a book of face? What are your thoughts on how people put it out there? It's clearly not the norm of many conferences are not going ahead, certainly not in person. They might be virtual. How do you actually recommend people take the action steps to make it happen?
Well, there are two ways. You can do it yourself, and I'll talk about that first, and then I'll talk about how we do it with the people we work for. The thing is that we would like to control as many hits on Google as we can. And if we publish everything on our LinkedIn, that will still generate only one hit. If we also publish it on Twitter and we have some activity on Twitter, then probably Twitter will also be on our first page. So that's 2 out of 10. Then you have to start looking at different kind of platforms. There are people who have a blog on Medium, for example, that will also generate one hit. So sometimes people say, I've written 100 blogs and they're all on my blog. End of the day, one hit. So you have to think about using more platforms, different platforms, which is kind of a hassle because you're not publishing 20 or 10 articles a week. That's why we came up with our solution, which is that we do this for you. So we use platforms like Medium, like WordPress, Blogger, Script, etc. And we use them, and that's a little bit our secret, we use them for all of our clients. And that makes that we use what we call the power of many. Mm-hmm. Because if Google sees that on my platform there is not one article, but there are 100 articles, then Google says, hey, this is interesting, so it pushes it up in the search engine. That means that Alexander's story, Anouk's story, John's story, Jane's story, they all pop up when you Google their names. So that's how you can achieve, let's say, a full control of your online presence. Again, you can do it yourself, but it's going to take a lot of work. Or you can say, well, I'm going to use the power of many, and I'm going to use the platforms that Signet has.
And let's just give an example of this. So you are on my podcast today, and all of my audience around the world is hearing the power of the Signet.com experience and what you guys do. You might be giving this presentation on other podcasts to other groups, and not only getting to their audiences, but those people publish when the episode goes live, as we will, and you'll be on all of our social media that will generate hits. That's an example of what you're talking about, that if people have a chance, whether you're getting in the newspapers or magazines or on podcasts, you are getting placed into different spaces. Google interprets those differently, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, if you publish our podcast, then it's under your control.
Mm-hmm.
If Signet publishes it, it's under our control. And that means, and I know you, so if I would like to change something, I'm sure I can connect with you and say, hey, Alexander, can we please change this word or this keyword or something like this? If you have been interviewed by the New York Times, which is great, and it will probably score high on your Google results, you can never change it.
Right.
And that's what we do, and especially when we work with board directors, you would like to update or change something over the course of time. And then you say, well, actually, I'm on a new board, or I'm no longer on that board. So all the information that we did publish, we can always change it. And that's a big advantage, let's say, of being in control of your online presence. Or you could even say, I don't like this article, or don't like this picture anymore, please take it down.
And I think that's one of the things that really stood out at me the first time I went to your website, is you have several example profiles out there of people with different backgrounds and experiences and their goals and what they're trying to achieve. And you can see the professionalism that surrounds all of them, and the simplicity in some ways. You've helped them come up with, I'll call it like the pithy statement about all of themselves. They've clearly focused on the image they want to be getting across and the messaging. And you can see how someone has really invested a lot of time and energy so that the right version of themselves is coming across, which is what we're talking about today. And in some ways on this show, that's what we talk about on a regular basis, the sort of elevator pitch, if you'd like, that you're trying to get across to people and put it out there. And I'm going to say what you're doing, Anouk, is part of a push-pull strategy. For a lot of us, we might be pushing out there when we are networking with people, having, I guess it's these days, virtual coffees to talk about ourselves. But the stuff that you're doing, Anouk, sort of as you sleep overnight, can be pushing it out there for you in some ways. You're actually just getting the information out there so that Google and other places will find it, which sounds very powerful.
Yeah. I think the sentence, use Google as your wingman, or wingwoman, is a very true one. And you have to realize that you can have Google work for you. So Google is not this thing that decides everything on its own. And sometimes people say, well, I don't know, it seems as if Google is some magic thing. It's not. It works according to algorithms. They change all the time. So you have to make sure that you're on top of them. But you can influence to a certain extent what's out there. Of course, again, if your name is Jane Smith or John Smith, it's a bit more challenging. But in general, you can really make a big difference if you purposefully start thinking about, how do I want to be perceived? What is my brand? What's the image that I want to have out there? Of course, it has to be authentic, but you can control it. And you can ask peers or colleagues or friends. You can interview each other. You can have conversations. You can share the content, again, in your social media, on all kinds of platforms. So that over time, knowing that the chairman of the board or an executive search firm will Google you, that at least you are in control for a certain percentage, and knowing that what you're conveying is what you want to have out there, and it's not some random, well, I have no idea, I'm not in control, and whoever finds whatever, I don't care, because the I don't care doesn't work anymore, especially after COVID hit. But it's just, you want to make sure that you're being portrayed portrayed in the best way possible to support your quest for a board seat.
And Anouk, I remember the credibility that came from the introduction that I first got to you from Marianne Bruce, who's been on our show and is a very experienced board member. And you can see she's one of the example profiles you have up on your website, and you can see how that translates directly in the boardroom space for what she's trying to get across. And I remember leaving the presentation when I heard it from you, kind of going, and now what? And I went, well, there's two paths you can do this. You can do it yourself. You've given us information. People can start. Clearly, there's a certain amount of time involved and some energy, perhaps a little bit of expertise. For some people, it might be harder and some people a little bit easier. But obviously, there's an organization that you have with a lot of energy behind this, some sort of trade secrets that you were hinting at before, an established protocol for how someone can go about doing the personal branding, the content creation, and building that strong online presence. And I think what we can all take away from this is how essential that is. It would be possible to land a board seat without paying attention to your online presence, but it's highly unlikely, especially how connected the world is today. And I'm sure you've seen that for some of your clients.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, everything is possible. And you can always say, well, this is not for me and I don't want it. I mean, that's everyone's choice. It's just what we are seeing based on the people we work with, but also based on broader research, is that having a strong online presence generates up to 48% more business opportunities. And business being as broad as finding a new client, finding a board seat. Again, the world has changed, and chairman of the board, they will Google you, and it's just part of your personal sales funnel to make sure that your Google presentation or your online presence is as good as it can be. And it's like, you spend, $1,000 or $2,000 on a new suit. You also should spend money on building your online presence or energy or time, whatever the currency is.
That's right. And clearly the first action for everybody listening to this episode is go check yourself out in your Google search, see what you see if you're happy with it, and start making the action steps to go take forward and to be what you want to be in those search results. And Anouk, we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound. That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Anouk Pappers. I remember the first time I heard her give this presentation, I immediately went and Googled myself, and I was relieved because it was mostly what I wanted it to be, but there was still work to do. And I think that's hopefully the answer for you, and some of you might be shocked or a little disappointed, and that's okay because now you can take it forward. She's given a very clear sense of things that you can begin doing immediately to make yourself known. And this ties in with what we've talked about time and time again on this show about you need to know the brand that you're bringing, what you stand out for, the specialization that you have. And Anouk's got a very clear way to make sure other people know about that, because it's not just who you know, it's what they know about you so that they can help you. Now remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you will find links to all of today's resources. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.